Well, good afternoon, everybody. This is Professor Spicer, Social Work 972, Topics in Human Sexuality, and this is Session 3. Now, today, we're going to make a slight change to the syllabus, at least the schedule, not the content. Today, we're only going to be talking about the masculinity lecture. So we're continuing diversity from last week. I am moving the reproductive health stuff on puberty and anatomy and physiology to next week, because next week I had planned only to talk about sexually transmitted infections, and I don't need all that much time to talk about sexually transmitted infections. So we're going to do all that next week, and that gives us time to really look into a little bit more of this diversity issue, particularly masculinity, which I think is it's essential to talk about in sexuality if you're really going to have a solid understanding of what's going on in the world of sexuality. And you'll see why as we continue. So let me start the slideshow. Now, I just want to check really quick. Can everybody hear me? Yep. Excellent. Thank you. So I'm going to leave this over on the side so that it can type. And I think that should do it right here. All right. So, why is masculinity so important when addressing sexuality? Well, first of all, it represents one element that's dominant in nearly all cultures. There are many isms with roots in dominant masculinity. So let's attempt to envision the birth of gender roles. You're going to have to go back a ways, I think, right? So when did they begin? Where in Earth's history? Well, nobody knows. As far as we know, we've always had some sort of gender roles, as long as we've had gender. But what were they, and how did they develop, and what do they have to do with how we live today? Why would human beings, anyway, require different sexes to play different roles? I mean, who cares, right? So, maybe it was ancient aliens. Maybe they set the whole thing up. Now, if you've ever watched the History Channel, they cover this stuff in great detail. And that guy in the middle with the crazy hair says, there's no proof at all that ancient aliens did not set the whole thing up. So just consider that for a minute. And then stop considering it, because I'm not going to cover ancient aliens. Maybe they were just somebody imposing arbitrary rules, like this guy. He looks like the thinker. So maybe this guy just thought the whole thing up and figured it would work out, and maybe that's a guy, and so he thought, man, maybe the whole thing should favor guys, It could be. So let's time travel. Let's go back to early humanity. And for those of you that don't know, that's the TARDIS. The TARDIS is Doctor Who's ship. That's how he time travels. It looks like that police box. The British remake of Doctor Who that's recent is actually pretty good, so if you want to check it out, it's on BBC, and sometimes on the Sci-Fi Channel. Anyway, so we've time traveled back into early human history. So here we are, and I ask you, what do you think? And I'm going to try and show the chat here, if I can. It doesn't seem to want to go with PowerPoint going. Which tribe do you think is stronger? Tribe 1 or Tribe 2? Go ahead and type your answer in the chat box. Tribe 1 or Tribe 2? Tribe 1? Yeah, Heather says 2. Now the girls say 2 and the guy says 1. Well, guess what? It's Tribe 2. And let me tell you why it's Tribe 2. There's one fundamental reason why. It's because in 100 years, Tribe 2 would be eating Tribe 1's lunch because they'd have so many more people that they would just out-survive them. They would out-compete them. While a lot of people say, hey, males have certain competencies and maybe males are better at some things than females, especially survival tasks, because men love to rough it. It's a traditional point of view. But, for survival value, women really mean survival. So this is something that's a key to our understanding of what real strength is. And real strength really does lie in how many women are there. Now think about reproduction for a second. Let's look at Tribe 1. Let's say they sent out a hunting party and half the guys were lost. So there's only 10 males now. They come back. How many babies can they have that year? 10, because they've got 10 females. We got Tribe 2. Let's say that they sent out a hunting party, 10 males, and they lost 8 of them. Their male hunters were terrible at chasing woolly mammoths or whatever it is that they chase. And only 2 of them came back. How many babies could they have that year? 20. Exactly. So, to make the point, it just puts a fine point on it. Males' bodies are not as important. And if you lost those females, if you lost 8 of 10 females, you can only have 2 babies. That's a huge blow to the long-term survival of your tribe. So, gender roles may have originated as a function of biological sex roles regarding reproduction. It really makes a lot of sense that it would play out this way. So, due to these roles, the fundamental presumption is that women's bodies are essential to the future of a tribe and were marked for protection. The female's gender role would then evolve around ideas of females as mates, mothers, and keepers of the home. And I say home base because I don't want to, say home keepers and have that 1950s version of the, woman with the vacuum cleaner and the apron and all that stuff. No, they were like the guardians and keepers of the home. Much different than, the more meek vision of femininity that we have. Maybe not today, but 50 years ago. So, next is, men's bodies, being less essential, were marked as expendable enough to be assigned the deadly and dangerous work. It's not that we don't love the males in our tribe, it's just there's certain realities we gotta deal with, dude, so head out with the hunting party, and hopefully you come back. So the male's sex gender would then evolve around ideas of males as hunters and warriors. Alright, so I'm going to keep going. And I'm going to move this down again. It's just smart. Cave smart. That's what I call it. That's a t-shirt I think I'm going to make. Gender roles then become fundamental to culture. And when I say fundamental to culture, I mean they come first. So these gender roles are there. So, men do this, women do that at a fundamental level. And then culture builds upon that, and they instruct people on the finer points of gender roles and their behavioral expectations. So while, guys should be hunters and warriors, well, what does that look like in this culture? Okay? And that's how there's a diversity in masculinity, but it is all based on sort of the same core element. All right? Natural selection then works over time as we select males with manly traits and females with womanly traits as defined by the cultures that they live in. And then this reinforcing spiral ensues over the years, and we've got thousands of years invested in some really basic gender roles. Okay, so our bodies after a while start to look like what we are trying to make ourselves. Okay? So we kind of, we make ourselves at the same time that it makes us. Very interesting. So let's examine the fundamental evolution of masculinity. So here we go. Hunter and warrior. So let's look at physical, psychological, and emotional qualities of, the perfect hunter and the perfect warrior. Why don't you guys throw some at me? What do you think? Physical qualities. What would you want your hunters and warriors to have, physically? I think I should have a get ready to type notice that pops up in the presentation for everybody. Strength. Yes, Josh, you definitely want them to have strong. Agility. Yep. Anything else? Adaptability, dexterity. Yeah. Now we're talking. That's pretty good. All right, let me keep going. Let me see what I got for this. So here, tough, strong, muscular, agile, tall, imposing, dominant, virile, have some sex drive, and a big penis. Because, you can't hunt without one of those. Actually, what I'm going to be adding on to here is that, the hunter and the warrior is today's male. Oh my goodness. I've got some great chat going on here. Yes, of course. The big penis does help. And, all that. So, but, that kind of gets piled on to today's male. Like, the more, the hunter and the warrior still exist within masculinity. And then we add things like big penis and sex drive. Although if you're going to father children, and that's one of the things that you've got to do, even the tough job of being the only guy left, and there's 20 women who need babies that year, and, you got to do it, So maybe that isn't just modern. Maybe that started that way to begin with. So psychological, let's see. I'm going to just tell you this. Clever, strategic, smart, tough, again, tough is both physical and a psychological state. Determined, aggressive. You have to be a leader and be admirable. You have to be in charge, a protector, okay? So, do you guys want to add any to the psychological? It's kind of hard to just think of these things, but it's actually ingrained in us. This activity that I do, that you're seeing sort of laid out in front of you, I facilitate this activity with people in college, with teenagers, and I usually separate them into 3 groups. And I say, okay, this group, I want you to design the perfect hunter. And that group, I want you to design the perfect warrior. And then the last group, I tell them, hey, listen, I want you to tell me the physical, psychological, and emotional qualities of, like, today's manly man. What would be considered a manly man today? And I lay them out side by side when they're done and compare the results. And what you get is the same list 3 times. So for emotional, stoic and detached, you could see, if you're a hunter, you would have to be a little bit detached because, you're out on the land, you're living off the land. It's not really easy to do. I don't know if you've ever tried it, but it gets old after a while. It's certainly not comfortable, and you might be really hungry and tracking something that's hard to find. For a warrior, you have to be stoic and detached because you have to kill other human beings, and that's not something that most people can just do very easily. You have to have some sort of emotional control there. It's also, angry helps, and your anger makes you powerful and strong and scary and all that stuff, formidable. You can also be gregarious because after you win, you got to have a party. So you expect the guys to, like, be celebrating and be leading the party and that sort of thing. So, today's example, hey, there's a Super Bowl coming up this weekend. And I think that there's already been some gregarious celebrating on the part of the fans of the 2 teams that are going. And I'm sure that leading up during the game and well after the game, there's going to be quite a bit of partying and celebration. So that's it. And the other thing is ruthless. You gotta kind of be mean. You gotta be able to cause pain and be okay with it. And you know, people have to understand that you're capable of that. So, I want to show you a video. This is a video from a video called Tough Guys. And Tough Guys is produced by the Media Education Foundation. And there's a guy over there named Sexuality, and he does a lot of media information pieces. And the guy that really works on the masculinity stuff with him his name is Jackson Katz. So you're going to see him talking about this. This is actually the idea to run an activity like this with the boxes came from Jackson Katz and his Tough Guys video. So without further ado, let me just play this here.
Boys and young men learn early on that being a so-called real man means you have to take on this tough guys. In other words, you have to show the world only certain parts of yourself that the dominant culture has defined as manly. You can find out what those qualities are if you just listen to young men themselves.
A real man is physical.
Strong. Independent.
Is powerful.
Physical.
Intimidating.
Strong.
Independent.
In control.
Rugged.
Scares people.
Powerful.
Respected.
Hard.
A stud.
Athletic.
He's muscular.
A real man is tough.
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 And just as most young men know what our culture expects of a so-called real man, they also know very well what you get called if you don't measure up. To be a real man, to be tough, strong, independent, respected, means fitting into this narrow box that defines manhood. The terms that are the opposite of that, wuss, wimp, fag, sissy, are insults that are used to keep boys boxed in. So if you're a boy, it's pretty clear there's a lot of pressure on you to conform, to put up the act, to be just one of the guys. So the next question is, where do boys learn this? Obviously, they learn it in many different places. They learn from their families, their community. But one of the most important places they learn it is the powerful and pervasive media system, which provides a steady stream of images that define manhood as connected with dominance, power, and control. This is true across all racial and ethnic groups, but it's even more pronounced for men of color because there is so little diversity of images of them to begin with in the media culture. For example, Latino men are almost always presented either as boxers, criminals, or tough guys in the barrio, and Asian American men are disproportionately portrayed as martial artists or violent criminals. But transcending race, what the media do is help to construct violent masculinity as a cultural norm. In other words, violence isn't so much a deviation as it is an accepted part of masculinity. We have to start examining this system and offering alternatives, because one of the major consequences of all of this is that there's been a growing connection made in our society between being a man and being violent. In fact, some of the most serious problems in contemporary American society, especially those connected with violence, can be looked at as essentially problems in contemporary American masculinity. For example, over 85% of the people who commit murder are men, and the women that do often do so as a defense against men who are battering them. 90% of people who commit violent physical assault are men. 95% of serious domestic violence is perpetrated by males, and it's been estimated that 1 in 4 men will use violence against a partner in their lifetime. Over 95% of dating violence is committed by men, and very often it's young men in their teens. Studies have found that men are responsible for between 85 and 95% of child sexual abuse, whether the victim is female or male. And 99.8% of people in prison convicted of rape are men. What this shows is that an awful lot of boys and men are inflicting an incredible level of pain and suffering, both on themselves and on others. And we know that much of the violence is cyclical, that many boys who are abused as children grow up and become perpetrators themselves. So calling attention to the way that masculinity is connected to these problems is not anti-male. It's just being honest about what's going on in boys' and men's lives. And while women have been at the forefront of change and trying to talk about these issues in the culture, it's not just women who will benefit if men's lives are transformed. In fact, while men commit a shameful level of violence against women in our society, statistically speaking, the major victims of men's violence are other males. There are millions of male trauma survivors walking around today, men who were bullied as adolescents or abused physically or sexually as children. Thousands more men and boys are murdered or assaulted every year, usually by other men. So men have a stake in dealing with these problems, and not just those of us who have been victims, but also those men who are violent or who have taken on the tough guys. They do so also at the expense of their emotional and relational lives.
Some of my friends, they, I don't know, they'll just like walk around like, you know, they're better than everybody and they're tough and all that stuff. And then like I'd be alone with them and they'd be like the biggest baby. If they have like a problem with like a girlfriend or something, they'd be like crying and stuff. But when they're around a lot of people, they've got like that big front. They got to be like, you know, tough.
I deal with this front all the time in my own work as an anti-violence educator. I've worked with literally thousands of boys and men on high school, college, and professional sports teams, in the United States military, in juvenile detention centers. I've seen an awful lot of men and young men put on this tough guise. In many ways, they're putting it on as a survival mechanism. They have to do it to survive in whatever peer culture they happen to be in. But putting on the tough guise comes with a cost, and that is a cost in terms of damage to their psyches and their ability to be decent human beings. So it's in everyone's interest to examine masculinity, to pull back the curtain on the tough guy posing and see what's really going on underneath. All of this is going to take a lot of work, and it's not going to happen with just individual boys and men being more reflective about their choices. It's going to happen both on a personal and on an institutional level. Everyone has a role to play here, and not just men. While girls and women are not responsible for men's violence, they too have an important role to play, because the tough guys is attractive to men in part because they see many girls and women validating it. Girls and women have to show that they're looking for more in men than bad boy posturing, and in particular, that they value men who reject the tough guys. We also have to work to change the institutions that create our present choices. For example, we need to break the monopoly of the media system that we've been looking at, where mostly rich white men dictate to the whole society the kinds of images and stories of manhood that surround us. Many men today are searching for new, healthier, self-respecting ways of being men in a rapidly changing world. We need to hear their stories too and learn from them. In different ways, all of us have to struggle for real cultural and structural changes in this society if we want our sons and their sons to have a chance of being better men.
If you go to that website, mediaed.org, there's another video that's more recent than Tough Guys, and it's called Wrestling with Manhood, and it's about, actually analyzes the professional wrestling world, and you know, the dramatic popularity of that, especially with young men, and you know, the kind of stories that they tell in wrestling, and how they tell them, and why they tell them, and why they're so appealing, and why they're not necessarily healthy stories for young men to kind of be obsessing with. And full disclosure, they've got me on their website telling everybody it's a good video, so I get no kickbacks, in case you're wondering. Oh, Josh, you think you saw that one? I mean, I like that video. I get a lot of mileage out of that with boys, because it's about wrestling, and then you get to talk about wrestling, and they like that. So, you know, that's cool. All right, so here we go. Now, like I said, the idea was sort of sparked to talk about this box of masculinity, to show how people are sort of limited in that box. You know, I like to tell the story about, you know, just my own personal story about when I was young. I was a musical kid. I knew how to play the piano, and I played the violin and the viola, and I was in the, you know, quartet and all that stuff. And but I was also, at least in my mind, I was a cool kid in school. And you know, in elementary school, it was fine. I didn't experience any issues for For instance, carrying my violin case home from school, you know, walking outside. Nobody really picked on me. When I went to middle school, you know, people didn't pick on me, but I got comments. You know, there was always something there. Somebody saying something to me in a derogatory way that I would have a violin or a viola, because it's not really a manly thing to have. And by high school, you know, it was time for me to switch schools and go to high school. I didn't want to play anymore. I quit. And I regret it, of course, now that I'm an adult. But back then, as a teenager, I just didn't want to deal with it. I didn't want to deal with, you know, walking in on freshman day. And back then, they used to really haze people, you know, on orientation day, which was the whole first week of school. And all the freshmen got painted with lipstick and hit with shaving cream and all that stuff. They're not allowed to do that anymore. But back then, you know, it was a concern. And I certainly didn't want to have anything to draw attention to myself as a target. So there I was, being forced into a box of masculinity where something that I really enjoyed and something that enriched me was a little bit outside that box, and I caved into the pressure. So one of the things that we really want to do is let's look at that. Now we kind of looked at what's in the box. Let's look more about what's outside the box. You know, in Tough Guys, they sort of gloss over it a little bit. You know, you saw the words, you know, some of them there, but there's more to that. Language is very important, and the names that you call people, they all mean something. They all have some sort of intent. So let's look at this. Let's look at these names that people call you. Oh, I'm gonna have to move this over here now. All right, so we got fag, homo, gay. Excuse me, this is the part where the, you know, language comes in that's going to be offensive to some people. I put it up here even though it's offensive because it's important to talk about. Like, we really have to address it in all its glory. So let's just go. Asshat, cocksucker, sweetie pie, cockknocker, mama's boy, bitch, girl, woman, you got your period, you're on the rag, stuff like that, pussy, jerk, punk, loser, and racial slurs. You know, all these are names that you get called. And you know, the weird thing about this is when you grow up male, you get called these names more often than not by people that don't like you, but by your friends. You know, they're kind of razzing you, and it's a game to see who can, you know, get one over on the other guy. And so it's not really that hostile. It's meant to sort of be funny, but what are these words and what do they mean, and where's this all going? And one of the things that I asked young men to do when I would do programs with them around the city of Buffalo and even up into Niagara Falls is I wanted them to rank them. So I wanted to know which ones they thought were like the worst. And so what happened is some categories began to emerge over time when I saw patterns in what they thought was really serious and what they thought was just kind of like, well, one person thought it was serious and another person didn't, you know, that sort of thing. So this is what sort of happened. We've got 3 categories. So at the bottom, let's start with like jerk, punk, and loser, and racial slurs. So this category is a category of insults that depends on who you are, where you come from, what you look like, that sort of thing, whether or not these kind of insults are going to really offend you. And there's a lot more than just these 4, believe me. And when I do it with teenagers, man, they just load up this whole screen with stuff. But, you know, if somebody calls you a racial slur that doesn't match your race, you know, it's just kind of stupid. It's not, you know, really effective. And, you know, punk. I learned that in Buffalo, the word punk was horrible to say to somebody. And, you know, where I grew up, if you were a punk, it meant you were a rebel. So it wasn't really an insult. It was more like, you know, it was saying, like, you're a rebel, I don't like it, but, you know, I can't control you. So it wasn't really as demeaning as to us as it is in Buffalo for a lot of the kids here. So, Josh, okay. Oh, right. So it was the rebel or the bad one? The rebel. Okay, yeah. So it's really interesting, and guys would argue about it, over and over, like, is it really that bad? And so it opens up an opportunity to say, you know, how much should it affect you? Because I mean, for my whole life, if somebody calls me a punk, I am just not gonna I'm not gonna be that insulted, you know. Um, I'm pretty secure as it is, but at the same time, I'm just not going to get worried about it. It's never going to bother me. Another name might bother me more. So let's go to the second one. You got fag, homo, gay, butt pirate, ass had, cocksucker, sweetie pie, cockknocker, mama's boy. This is a category into itself, and it's really, you see a lot of homophobic comments here, right? But there's more to it than this. There's more at work here than just calling somebody gay. Why do boys want to call other boys gay when they're razzing their friends and trying to get one over on them? And basically what you're trying to do is dominate your friend by demeaning him as much as possible. So by calling them gay, you're definitely seeing, you're looking down at someone who's gay. But there's more to it than that, because what is the stereotypical gay man? He's feminine, right? He's effeminate. So, yeah, exactly. Thank you, Heather. So, you've got these certain qualities that come out. Now, these were the sort of second tier categories that they said, yeah, these were offensive, but also funny. So, and they had a lot of fun talking about them. And then, at the top, the most offensive one by far was bitch. If you were a guy and you kind of called another guy a bitch, that was fighting words, hands down. Most of these guys said that. Even a friend would know better than to call you a bitch, unless it was a really well placed joke. So so you got bitch, girl, woman, got your period, pussy. This, you don't even have a penis, right? You're basically being called a girl. So really what we've got going on here is not so much an obsession with heterosexuality and knocking down homosexuality, but it's insulting other guys by giving them feminine attributions, right? So think about that for a minute. Now, some further proof that I'd like to offer you that this is really more about sexism than it is about heterosexism and about orientation. If you look and do a survey of male-focused pornography, and you check and see what is the fundamental story, what are the things that are going to happen in porn that is made for straight men, 95% of that porn has homosexuality in it. That's right. It just happens to be girl on girl homosexuality, not guy on guy. So the problem with homosexuality is not necessarily that it's two people of the same sex enjoying each other. The real problem that straight men seem to have with homosexuality is when it's guys. And for some reason, I'm pretty sure that plays into sexism and this chauvinism that men are better than women, men are better than women. Now, what does it say about us that most of the time that we spend as young men insulting each other and razzing each other and doing all this is really just training in misogyny? What does it say about us? And why don't people realize this on a daily basis? People really just take it for granted that it's a joke, it's funny, and it goes no further than that. And I think for a lot of well-meaning people, that's true in their well-meaning world. But not all men have the ability to call someone else a butt pirate, have it be funny, and then walk away and treat women and gay men as their 100% equals. Right? There are some men that can, that do all the time. But there are also other men who really internalize these attitudes and act on those attitudes separate from the name calling and the even the dynamics of, you know, guys hanging out and razzing each other. It could be in a relationship, and it could have an impact on how, you know, a heterosexual man treats the person that he's dating who's a female, and his idea of who should be in charge, right? And how she should be behaving, and what he should get to do and what she should get to do, and that sort of thing. So it really goes very far. And in our society, I'm going to say this is a root problem. This is a root problem. This underlies a lot of things that are going on in our culture. So first, I want to add a few more definitions, okay? Oppression. Oppression is unjust or cruel exercise of authority or power. Something that oppresses, especially in being an unjust or excessive exercise of power. So you're either, you know, oppression is either something that oppresses or it's the act itself. Next one, sexism. Prejudice or discrimination based on sex, especially, and it says, discrimination against women, behavior, conditions, or attitudes that foster stereotypes of social roles based on sex is sexism. Heterosexism is discrimination or prejudice by heterosexuals against homosexuals. Misogyny is defined as a hatred or dislike of women or girls. Patriarchy, or being patriarchal, is social organization marked by the supremacy of the father in the clan or family, legal dependence of wives and children, and the reckoning of descent and inheritance in the male line, broadly controlled by men of a disproportionately large share of power. A society or institution organized according to the principles or practices of hierarchy is patriarchal. So we live in a patriarchal society still to this day, and yes, things are changing, and women in the last 100 years have made a lot of great strides, but it's not over yet. And then male chauvinism is an activity indicative of the belief in the superiority of men over women. So if you just take these definitions and what you've just experienced in terms of the learning and talking about a male gender role, you can see that there is something at work, right? So if you've got male chauvinism in a patriarchal society, there's sexism and oppression, and heterosexism comes along with it, and in some cases even misogyny, okay? I hope you guys are following this. Are you getting this? Yes, all right. Thank you, Heather. Yep. Now next, the male sex's gender role began as an adaptive adjustment for survival and did not, at least in the beginning, include all of the isms. In fact, the point of gender roles were to create a well-honed survival thrival machine. That's my term, survival thrival. I think that's cool. So the male gender role exists today as an archetype bereft of the wisdom from which it sprung. Most males do not question the validity of the expectations placed on them under the rules of masculinity. They just don't remember the why anymore. And there are consequences. For women, the consequences include having to fight for rights equal to men inside and outside of the home. So the right to vote, the right to reproductive health care, including birth control and abortion, the right to work in any chosen career. Just this week in our lives, in 2013, the Army said women can begin to do combat jobs. Okay? Just now. Also, domestic violence. If you've got a male chauvinist, thinks he runs his home, he's better than the women in his household, and he might use violence to keep that going, or other kinds of abuse. Emotional, economic abuse, all that stuff comes along with it. Rape and sexual assault. Again, this is sexualized violence, but it's a control mechanism. Rape and sexual assault is a feeling of privilege. Same with sexual harassment. You feel like you're privileged as a guy. You know it's not right to assault someone, but because you're a guy and it's a woman, it's an exception to the rule. And I can justify that by whatever the situation was, or maybe what she was wearing, or how she was acting and behaving, and she should have known better. Lots of reasons why it's her fault, not his, that she was assaulted. Okay? And only in a patriarchal, male chauvinistic, sexist society could you get away with a rationality like that. Could you intellectualize putting somebody on such a different level so unequally? So, and there, the privilege to feel safe in an elevator, that's just something that a lot of guys don't understand. They take their safety for granted, where women have to think about it more. And they're not going to always be protected or understood when they're not being extra cautious. And that's just simply not fair. So, but there are also consequences for men, and Jackson Katz kind of got into that a little bit in the video, but I'm going to get more deeply into it. Boys and adolescent males constitute the largest number of young people who drop out of school, commit suicide, are victims of violence, are incarcerated, are assigned to special education classes, are referred in school for disciplinary actions, receive lower grades throughout their schooling, fail grades, and have accidental deaths related to cars. Given what we've been talking about, you're not challenged that much to look for reasons why these are true. Next one, Ackerman, 1993, describes the codependent male. He depends on a woman to act out his emotional side. He controls situations, sometimes to extremes. Is a workaholic. Is good at rescuing and protecting, but not interacting. If a father may be living through his son. Exhibits stress disorders. Has relationships filled with anger. There's more. Uses other males for ego strength. Has a problem with addiction. Lacks emotional expression. Has one dimension of self-worth, that's often the occupation, and has a fear of intimacy. Lacks spirituality. Is externally validated only by what he does. Exhibits extreme rigidity. Overly asserts his masculinity. Okay, so think about this for a second. You got this codependent male, this idea of a codependent male. What does that really mean, and why would a male be codependent? Well, let's look back to that box. I'm going to go back for a second here. Here's the box. Look at the emotional side. This is what is okay for males, especially young males, teenage males who are in that like gender judgment pressure cooker. What emotions are they allowed to show? They could be stoic, and stoicism is always, a great mask for depression. I mean, guys can walk around depressed and just act like they don't talk much. It's okay to show anger, because your anger, again, it makes you powerful. It makes you look powerful. It's acceptable. You can be gregarious, which means life of the party. Excuse me, not giddy, because that might be gay, but gregarious is okay, as long as you don't overdo it. And again, ruthless, again, that kind of goes with angry. But where are the rest of the emotions? Where is everything else? Men are human beings. They experience a full range of emotions. Period. They do. All men do. So, what happens with the rest of them? Well, emotions can be a great source of shame for guys. If they feel perhaps insecure. Maybe they like somebody, or they're just getting involved in a relationship and somebody else comes along and they're worried that they might like that other person better than them. Any normal person's going to feel a little bit insecure and maybe a little jealous, or, like, oh no, I kind of got hopes for this relationship going somewhere. Any human being, male, female, doesn't matter. You feel something, but what do you do with it, right? What do you do with it? Women have permission to express a wider range of emotions. Men have to channel this into something else. Maybe they'll channel it into stoicism. Maybe they'll channel it into anger. Maybe their insecurity will show or present, if you will, as anger. Right? Or maybe they just get inappropriately gregarious. You've seen this in guys. You had to have seen this in kids. They sometimes just act like idiots, or they laugh inappropriately, or and that's just them trying to turn on the filter, turn on the emotional converter, and turn it into something that is acceptable when their emotions are going to leak out. Okay, so what happens is, guys, that tough guys that Jackson Katz was talking about was this sort of persona of masculinity. It's a mask. That's what the guise means, and but because they're really human and they have to express their emotions, well, there's somebody in their life that is going to be there. It's going to be in their intimate relationship, where they're going to be at their most vulnerable, and they're going to show that emotional side. So for a lot of young men, being in an intimate relationship is their human side. Without that relationship, they might not have that. They might have an outlet for all of their emotions, especially the ones that might bring them shame. They rely on somebody that they're intimately involved with to understand them, to accept them for having these, maybe normally unacceptable emotions. Okay? All right, let's keep going here. I'm going to go back. So what happens is they get into a relationship and they become dependent on that person. Losing that relationship means losing their human side. Okay? So, and this is what happens to guys when they live that way. They don't question it, and they don't get help or have somebody in their life that's that understanding. So, Ackerman further suggests that these codependent males hold stereotypical views of manhood, including being very competitive, courageous, distant, and silent. The macho credo is adopted by these males in an effort to avoid showing pain. And that's from the Handbook of Counseling Boys and Adolescent Males. That's Horn and Kaselka, 1999. I'm going to tell you, that book is by far, the most useful book if you're going to be doing counseling with people with penises. There's so much research summary in there, and good models and information that you can go from special populations of guys. It's fantastic. All right, so what I'm going to be sharing with you now is published in that book, and it's got multiple authors. So Ackerman went on to describe 7 types of codependent males, all of whom develop their codependency during childhood. These are the triangulator, the detacher, the achiever, the hypermature, the passive son, the conflict avoider, and the other directed one. So the triangulator has never learned to deal with issues directly. He blames his problems on external causes, and he has difficulty accepting responsibility for his behavior. He's angry at the world. He thinks of himself as very independent, while in truth, he has difficulty being close to anyone because he believes there are external causes for his behavior. He sees nothing wrong with his anger. The detacher. The detacher is inclined toward ending or escaping an uncomfortable situation at the first sign of trouble, even before he finds out whether or not the problem can be worked out. He has not learned conflict resolution skills. He thinks his physical detachment constitutes emotional detachment. He fears exposing his pain and vulnerabilities. His motto is, safety at all times. Unfortunately, the result for the detacher is often experiencing loneliness. The achiever. The achiever has an empty feeling inside that tells him he is never good enough and that his worth is dependent on accomplishments that others can see, because it was only through his achievements that he received recognition from his family or others. He's likely to be a workaholic, be driven by external forces, seldom has an internal sense of self-worth, and is likely a perfectionist and spends his life feeling disappointed. Says he values his family, but he does not value his time with them. In relationships, he may be seen as dominating. He's a classic intellectualizer, and he depends on a woman for emotional nurturance. Okay? Now, as I read these, you might be thinking, I know that guy. And if you're a guy and I'm reading these and you might be thinking, wow, I'm that guy. Well, I'm that guy too. There's a lot of things, and I think that there's a little bit of this in everybody. But the way Ackerman has put this out, it's just very interesting. So I want to share it. The next one is the hyper-mature. He is overly serious, never lets his defenses down. He's always emotionally on guard and attempts to maintain control over his life at all times. He's overly self-critical, has difficulty having fun, and is likely to live under a high level of stress. He had too many responsibilities as a child and did not have sufficient time for a normal childhood. In relationships, he's often intense, analytical, and pressured by a sense of responsibility for the success of the relationship. He wants closeness, laughter, and warmth, but does not know how to get them. The passive one sits on the sidelines, watching the game of life go on, but secretly wishes he were playing. He seldom takes a stand when it comes to his own interests and issues. He feels relatively unimportant, and he believes that he has little to offer. In relationships, he puts his needs second, often tolerating a tremendous amount of inappropriate behavior from a partner. He believes he has few options, and he is, in fact, at high risk of being abandoned for a more interesting partner. I mean, that's really sad. I don't know about you guys, but I've definitely worked with kids like this, and you just think to yourself, this person just takes all these hits throughout life. They definitely don't hurt anybody. They definitely don't deserve to be hurt. And yet you see them not standing up for themselves and taking initiative and doing the things that you wish they would do, because you just want to see them happy. And this is a really insecure life to be living. Then, the conflict avoider. On the surface, the conflict avoider seems to be extremely competent at helping other people solve their problems. However, they are rarely able to handle their own. They help others with their issues to avoid facing their own. In relationships, they have a tremendous difficulty receiving from others, and they are extremely uncomfortable with others' emotional help and support. They can give closeness, but not receive it. Next is the other-directed one. And the other-directed one has learned to display the exact opposite of what he feels. He makes jokes to cope with pain because he's afraid if he stops laughing, he will cry. He strives to do what others want to avoid rejection. He sees himself through the eyes of others. He is easily manipulated as he fears abandonment. In relationships, he becomes a people pleaser and neglects taking care of himself. He is difficult to know, and his partner may enjoy his charm and sense of humor for a while, but enjoyment fades as the absence of openness and closeness become intolerable. So, those are the Ackerman calls them the silent sons and the codependent ones. So, it's an interesting model, and to think about guys as wounded, and he does give an eighth son that he kind of calls it, and that is the healthy survivor. And really what it is, it's a concept of somebody that has had developmentally inappropriate or neglected or just insufficient childhood as a young man and did not develop fully, or was harmed growing up, but somehow managed to come through and be a healthy survivor. And really what this is all about, all these sons, is that with codependency, you're never going to develop a mature masculinity. So with that survivor, what he's saying is that some people come through the craziest stuff and still come out healthy survivor. So none of this is carved in stone, but he can identify some of these, different things that happen and types of males that can come out of different situations. So in that same book, Horn, Jolliffe, and Roth, they put forward a model of male development that might address the impacts of the state of masculinity on individuals. Just think about this. This is society's expectations, unhealthy expectations on guys that are harmful to guys and can cause them individual hardship and a lot of serious issues, and maybe need counseling and other help and support. So what do? So they, these guys proposed the idea of the 5 teachers, and they really looked into this and did a lot of background work. And so the 5 teachers are, males have to have these teachers as part of their development so they can develop fully and into mature masculine men, and in turn play those roles themselves. And those roles are nurturers, role models, initiators, mentors, and elders. So I'm going to cover those. The nurturer. Let me try and move this over here again now, and we're here. The nurturer. Males must experience nurturing from a significant male in their lives. This is usually the father. And I say ... because it's not always the father. And in our society today, I think we have more fathers not raising their children than we've maybe ever had. And so this role, in a case like that, would have to be filled by another man, another nurturer that is a man, because this is what we're talking about, a male nurturer. This element is a significant contributor to the children's development of an internal locus of control, and this is really male children, empathy, and cognitive competence. Boys, while identifying with the father, being of like sex, allows for identity development. Okay? Well, boys do get identity development from being nurtured by mom, of course, absolutely. But there is something when you're looking at another male that's nurturing you, and that acts as a sort of manual that you as a male can also nurture and accept nurturing and have that kind of relationship with other males. So, internal resources that allow a boy to take risks and to have a sense of strength and power and to face life's challenges as a male come from this. And boys deprived of this teacher can lead to a lack of those internal resources and difficulty developing a healthy self-respect, and contributes to the development of fear of intimacy. Next, role models. Role models serve as representatives of the world beyond the parents and instill aspirations and ideals. Boys with positive role models grow to have flexible, adaptive identities and confidence in their abilities. Role models in our culture are abundant. Role models for mature masculinity, less abundant. I think part of the way our culture works and the way that it has been working, a lot of guys are becoming mature men quickly, and they can have great success and be role models before they're sort of ready to be a great role model. And there's a wonderful debate that always goes on, You know, I put a football player up there just to kind of show you that, you know, guys look up to athletes, and are athletes the best role models? Some athletes do a great job at it. Other athletes, wow, man, wow, no. So, choosing role models is also going to be the responsibility of the child, and you know they can be directed by the values of their parents on what role models there are. So, but there they are. Kids need role models, period. Next is initiators. So you see the drill sergeant there. The function of an initiation process is to help young males to learn priorities, to plan and execute strategies, and to delay gratification. Adolescents develop skills to set personal standards and how to assess their accomplishments. Missing an initiator experience can lead to a sense of perpetual adolescence in which a male will lack the appreciation for participating in a greater community. You know, I use a drill sergeant only because it's the greatest stereotypical initiator you could possibly imagine. You join the Army and this dude is going to like tell you how to really be. Everything that you've done up until that point is garbage. I was in the Army myself, and that's definitely what the drill sergeants told me. You know, and at the time I might have believed it a little bit because they have total control over your life at the time that you're in basic training. But, you know, eventually you come to appreciate what they were doing. You weren't a piece of garbage to them. They were teaching you something. Okay? So moving on. Oops. Mentors. A mentor offers a young man advice, sponsorship, and guidance. Mentoring relationships require young males to develop the character and ability to learn from others, listen to advice, work with others, manage emotions. Failure to work with a mentor early in one's career can lead to failure to thrive in a career and a sense of bitterness and failure. And then finally, elders. Elders are persons who are reflective and other-centered, and who can discriminate the authentic from the superficial. Their relationships feature collaboration and cooperation, not competition. There is a focus on meaning-making, from egocentricity to community-centeredness. Elders provide the global why. Without elders, young males may develop a fear of the new, lose the vision of the community, and fail to grow. Now, I said something very important. Elders provide the global why. In a culture now that is not valuing their elders as much as maybe they once did, it hurts masculinity even more. I mean, it raises the risk. It raises the stakes. Because if you're trying to be masculine for masculinity's sake, then you're going to be immature and aggressive, and you're going to be all those things without any kind of wisdom whatsoever. Because you're not supposed to be masculine for masculinity's sake. You're supposed to be masculine for the community's sake. That's why the gender role is there. But it takes these guys, these elders, to pass on that wisdom, to provide that ultimate sort of mentoring so that young men can benefit from that and learn the real deal. That they can see through the superficial and get to the authentic. All right. So, that is the masculinity lecture. Does anybody have any questions so far? I know we have Jessica and Heather still here. Nope, no questions? All right. So here is the challenge problem. The virtual study group is due next week. Uh-oh. My computer is going to turn off on me, so I better finish this quick. Challenge problem. Some experts believe that masculinity in and of itself should be considered a risk factor for wellness and a source of trauma. First, I want you to discuss why we should or should not lend credence to such a position. And then second, how can we address issues of masculinity from a trauma-informed perspective? So I'm hoping that you got education in other courses in your program on trauma-informed care or trauma-informed perspective. If not, you're going to have to look it up and get yourself informed about trauma-informed. All right. So You're going to go to the discussion group in UB Learns in Blackboard for the course, and there are no threads. There's only a forum that I started. So you're going to have to start your own threads. You're going to have to begin your own conversations. You start your own thread. You can jump in on one that's already begun, but someone's going to have to kick it off. It's not going to be me. This is your job as students to make this conversation happen, and I'm just going to watch it happen and give you guys feedback. I might chime in a little myself, but we'll see. Okay? If you have any questions about that, please email me. If you're having a hard time with the system, I think pretty much everybody's got it down now. But, you know, there's always technical difficulties, so just let me know. I'll work with you. All right, so that's it. Now you also have some study questions that are going to be due next week. I think, I'm going to double check that. You definitely have a reflection paper, so limit your reflection paper to this lecture. That's probably the best idea. All right, if you go out and do more, that's fine. But that's all I'm requiring is this lecture. All right, now if there are questions, I'm posting questions as they happen. So tonight, when I review the assignment, I'm going to post what the questions are that are on the reading. And I'm going to try and get ahead on that if I can, but I really wanted to leave it open to, you know, the kinds of things that we were exploring and where our virtual study group might go to make the questions as useful as possible and as least generic as possible. All right. So I hope everybody has a wonderful evening, and I'm going to be signing off. I want to thank Heather and Jessica. Have a wonderful evening. Goodbye.